Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Fox. This is Made to Ramble, and if you follow this channel at all, you'll know it's been quite a few months since my last video. But here I am, back again, and in this episode we'll be taking a look at the Insta360 One R, comparing it to the newer One RS. We'll see whether or not it's worth buying now in 2022, or should you upgrade if you own one already? Now, I've owned the One R for about a year or so now, maybe even longer. I have three of the mods. I have the 360 mod, the 1-inch, and the standard 4K action camera mod. That last mod, though, I have never used. And I really don't see any point in using it when I have the far superior 1-inch mod. So I'm not going to be talking about that one. What I'll do in this video is I'll split my critique into three sections, one for each of the mods, two mods, and one for the modular system overall. And we'll try and compare what you get with the newer Insta360 One RS. We'll start with the cons here, I think, get them out of the way first. The 360 mod really doesn't have enough resolution for my taste. 5.7K may sound like a lot, but that's split across two different lenses. So by the time you've reframed your shots, you really only end up with around a 1080p image, and a pretty inconsistent soft 1080p image at that. So Insta360 have recently released a newer 1-inch 360 mod, which is a little bigger and has an improved resolution, but still only 6K. It will almost certainly do a better job in low light though, and it should have better dynamic range, but I'm not convinced that the added resolution is enough to warrant the additional cost, especially given that you need a vertical battery to use it, which only adds even more to the price. The truth is though, at this stage, there are no 360 cameras that really compete where resolution is concerned. Not without costing thousands of dollars anyway. So yeah, the resolution isn't great, but there are ways around that. Like all of the 360 footage that I recorded for this video has been upscaled from 1080p to 4K using Topaz Enhanced AI, which is something that I would highly recommend doing yourselves, especially if you're planning to publish your footage in 4K. Not a perfect solution, but it does improve the image quality quite a bit, and that drop in resolution and detail when you're including your 360 footage alongside footage from other better cameras, that drop in resolution is quite a bit less noticeable. My other major complaint is that lenses are just too easily scratched. I've already had to replace my 360 mod once. Now there are two different lens protectors you can get. One which fits to the cage, which is not useful for me since I use mine with the larger battery base, meaning I have a different cage with mine. The other lens protector sticks onto the camera itself and can be used with a cage, any cage. This is a better option for me, but there's still likely to be some degradation of image quality and probably more issues with flaring too. Which brings me to another complaint. Flaring on this camera is pretty weird and distracting at times. Now, I imagine this is just a natural limitation of 360 cameras generally. With such weirdly shaped lenses, you're bound to have some issues with flaring. But it is something you'll need to factor in when choosing the time of day that you're filming. And finally, my last complaint, being such a wide angle, it's very easy to produce footage that's extremely unflattering. I have short legs, and these days I'm a little round in the middle, but there is no fucking way that I look this much like Humpty Dumpty. I've tried filming from different positions, high, low, different perspectives. I'm yet to find a perspective that is in any way flattering. So just for this reason alone, this is not a camera that I would recommend much for vlogging. So enough of the complaints now, let's get on with the positives. With this mod, you can record things that would not otherwise be possible. Just take a look at this footage here. Yep, good luck trying to achieve that with a mirrorless camera, especially that close to the water. With the ability to reframe after the fact, you can do all sorts of interesting camera moves. This can be really cool when recording a time-lapse. It is probably worth noting though that while I would normally combine multiple raw photos to produce a time-lapse, I found this workflow to be pretty tedious when it comes to 360 footage. I don't really think there's any advantage where quality or resolution is concerned either. If you record as video instead, you can do all your editing inside either the phone app or Insta360 Studio on your computer. This allows you to add a little motion blur as well, which can really improve the look of your time-lapse. With a lot of this footage, I've also added even more motion blur in post using a plugin that I purchased for use with DaVinci Resolve. The next positive, while I don't recommend using this camera for vlogging, it can be really useful for recording yourself and the environment around you when hiking. Really, any situation that's going to be unpredictable. This footage here was recorded a few weeks ago when I decided to do a bit of hiking at Bells Rapids, just in the eastern suburbs in the hills of Perth. There's a nearby waterfall that most people don't really know about, and I wanted to hike from the rapids to find the falls. It's not that easy to get to though. You do have to do a little bit of a Shawshank Redemption move to start with, climbing through a storm drain. I managed to get my shoes soaked. There is a bit of a path you can follow. It's not well marked or anything, but I didn't manage to get lost at least. Views are nice. Walking across the rocks is a little bit treacherous though, not helped by the fact that I was wearing shoes with very little tread. Should have had on hiking boots. And this is where I was really grateful for having the 360-degree camera. You never know what's going to happen, and I managed to catch that fall on video. I was even able to reframe the shot after the fact. So my adventures weren't quite over yet though. When I got up to the falls, I decided to try out my new DJI Mini 3 Pro for the first time, and wouldn't you know it, I'm a moron. I somehow seem to have forgotten that trees exist. This was my very first flight. It was like 6 seconds. Luckily the drone was not damaged, and I managed to get a second chance to send it up and capture some nice enough looking footage. Not really had much of a chance to play around with that yet though. Hadn't even set the frame rate or anything. And enough about the drone. I'm supposed to be talking about the Insta360 One R. So sorry, got distracted there a little. Finishing up with the 360 mod for now, let's move on to the 1-inch mod. Starting again with the negatives, let's talk about the stabilization. With the One R, it is apparently possible to stabilize in camera, but the stabilization is nowhere near as impressive as what can be done in post using the app. This isn't something that I bothered to mention when talking about the 360 mods, since you need to bring that into the app to reframe your shots anyway, so stabilization isn't really adding any extra work. But this is not the case with the 1-inch mod. With the 1-inch mod, it is an issue. Now, cameras like GoPro and the DJI Action Cam have really impressive stabilization in camera, but with the Insta360, you need to import your footage into the app or into Insta360 Studio for use with your Mac or PC, and it uses the gyro data to stabilize your footage. Stabilization looks fantastic, but it is adding an extra step to your workflow, which can be a real pain in the ass if you're working with a lot of footage. With the new Insta360 One RS, you can do your stabilization in camera, and by all accounts, the results are a lot better than what you can achieve with the One R. The other issue where stabilization is concerned, and this applies to both the One R and the One RS, is that it doesn't perform as well at slower shutter speeds. If you're wanting to stick to the 180-degree rule for more natural motion blur, that's where you keep the shutter at, say, twice the frame rate. For instance, 1/50th of a second for footage being recorded at 25 frames per second, then the footage will wind up looking pretty much unusable. You're far better off not using an ND filter and sticking with a much faster shutter speed. You can do what I do sometimes and add a little bit of artificial motion blur later in post, but this also means that in low light situations, the stabilization is pretty much unusable. For what it's worth though, in low light, I tend to use the camera on a little teeny weeny tripod, so I don't normally need to stabilize. Limits your options though, so that might not be an acceptable solution for some. Apart from the stabilization, I can't really think of any other issues with the 1-inch mod. I mean, at 5.3K, it has resolution to spare, footage is super sharp and detailed, colors are awesome. It's every bit as good for photography as it is for video, and with that ultra wide field of view, it's absolutely perfect for landscape photography. I think the only thing I might improve is aperture. I've tried at times to do some astrophotography with this camera and it's just not quite up to the task. Maybe a bit compromising on the size or the quality in some way if you change the aperture. I love using the 1-inch mod for time lapses. For best possible quality, you can combine multiple raw photos to produce a time lapse, or you can just use one of the in-camera options to speed up your workflow. There's a good reason why I would recommend looking elsewhere if you're after a camera for vlogging. The audio is shit. The in-camera mics are not great, but even more disappointing, the audio still sounds terrible even when recording internally using a lav mic with the USB adapter. This is apparently still the case with the newer One RS too. Insta360 needs to start putting more of a focus on audio quality if they want to compete. I love the modular design. Really like having the option to buy all of the different mods without having the extra cost of buying a whole new camera each time. Since the release of the One RS, we now have 2 more mods to add to the list, and they both look like really interesting options. The new update to the 4K action camera, the 4K boost mod, looks like an impressive update, and the 1-inch 360 mod is super tempting. You don't need to upgrade to the One RS to use those 2 mods. They will both work with the original One R, and you don't lose any quality either. The only major difference is the fact that you can stabilize better in camera with the One RS. Probably not that much of a concern if you're mostly planning to play around with the 360. If you're planning to buy the 4K boost mod or the 1-inch mod, that might still be a consideration then. So would I recommend buying the original One R or the One RS in 2022? Well, that's going to depend on price. Right now, if you're buying new, the price difference isn't all that large. If you're buying new, I think it just makes sense to buy the One RS, especially if you're planning to get the dual mod version. There's a big difference in quality if you're looking at getting the 4K mod versus the older model. If you happen to see the older version secondhand though at a good price, I don't think you'd be making much of a compromise by buying the older version. Now, what if you already have the original version? Should you upgrade? Well, I'm not planning to. It's possible I might look at buying one or both of the new mods eventually, but for the minimal upgrades that they've made to the system overall, especially given that they've done nothing to improve that audio, for me, there's just no tangible reason for me to upgrade. That completes this video. I hope it's been informative. I hope I haven't dribbled on too much. I'm trying to make these videos as concise as I possibly can. I've been Sean Fox. This has been Made to Ramble, and thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.